Welcome to the KO Insights podcast, where we bring you insights on the law and legal practice.
I think we treat compliance with the Data Protection Act as just a checklist, something we just need to tick. For instance, you're told that you need to get consent from the data subjects for any processing activities, and you just, here's a consent form, it's signed by Winnie, I have a consent. Okay, you forget, but that after this consent, then you need to make sure Winnie enjoys her rights as a data subject. So Winnie will come and decide one day she wants to see what data you have, and you need to show her.
Data Protection Supervisory Authority in Kenya. They are tasked with ensuring that the right to privacy under Article 31 is actually implemented and respected by organizations. If you're required to have a data protection officer, have you appointed one? Does the data protection officer actually perform their function in a way that is independent, that is, there's no conflict of interest? For instance, it can't be that, say, the IT manager is your data protection officer, because of course they're the ones who determine the means and purpose within the organization on how you're processing data.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to yet another part of the KO Insights podcast. We are extremely privileged to bring to you today a topic, data protection, which is something that is very dear to us. And for context, and just for you to walk this mental journey with us, imagine yourself that today you're acquiring a new system to enable you run a bit more efficiently. What do you need to do from the perspective of data protection compliance? Imagine yourself that today you become the victim of a threat actor, perhaps through phishing, or perhaps it may be a very innocuous process of perhaps finding yourself running through an email from a source that you do not trust, and you find that in fact your data has been exfiltrated from your institution to some external point of contact with the external world. What do you need to do from a compliance perspective? These are a few of the series of things that we're going to be talking to you about today. We have had quite a series of experience engaging with the regulator, the ODPC, in terms of ensuring that people remain compliant from the perspective of data protection impact assessments. Secondly, we are going to be talking to you about what to do in the event of a data breach. The regulator has very strict requirements for you, but most importantly, the regulator wants to see you interface with them in that particular process. We have experienced this, and we want to talk to you about this in more detail. So please join us in today's podcast as we talk about data protection generally, but also a bit more specifically, getting into the granular details of what to do with impact assessments, the granular details on what to do with data breaches, among many other topics that we're going to be discussing today in our podcast, Data Protection.
Today, we'll be delving into the world of data protection. What is data protection? What does it take to be a data protection practitioner? And what does it mean to receive an enforcement from the ODPC? To do this, I'm joined by two data protection experts, Winnie and Dan. Karibuni sana.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself, Winnie.
Thank you, Jentrix. My name is Winnie Ngige. I'm the Global Data Protection Officer for Blue Ventures Conservation, a UK-based organization. I handle data protection across different countries, including the UK, the EU, and Africa, as well as the Asia-Pacific region, and I'm happy to be here.
That's amazing. Dan?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Mutembei. I am an associate in the firm of Kiptines and Adambo Associates. I practice in the telecommunication, media, technology, and intellectual property practice area. As a matter of fact, I interact a lot with data protection, and it's good to be here with you today, Jentrix.
Okay, Dan, and maybe I'll just start with you. You say that you practice tech law and you specialize also in data protection. Where did this begin? Where does someone who is interested in doing what you do start?
Okay. Interestingly, I didn't start off as a data protection practitioner. I started off more as a telco and tech lawyer. And then gradually, because of the intersection and the interaction that these two practice areas have with data protection, then I have grown to love and like the practice in data protection as well.
Winnie, have you had a similar experience?
I know mine was quite different. Mine started back in campus. I knew I wanted to get into tech law, but at that time there were very few opportunities, if any, in the space. So immediately after campus, my first job was in legal and compliance. And in that role, I was tasked with advising the organization on data protection compliance. This time, the organization I was working at was getting acquired by an entity in the EU. So the first instance I got to interact with data protection was the GDPR. And then slowly, when the Data Protection Act came into place in 2019, that's when now I focused more on the Data Protection Act. From there, I'd say the rest is history because my roles have evolved from just being a legal and compliance officer to a data protection officer supporting some of the, I'd say, big corporations in the country, and also now just transitioning into a global role.
I really want to hear a bit more about what it means to be a DPO. I think it's one of those niche areas that is quickly developing, of course. So could you take us through what maybe even a day in your life would look like, especially in your current role where you're also doing a lot of international work?
As a DPO, there's no day that's the same. Yeah. By the time you're going home, say today, you have set up what your to-do list will look like tomorrow. But when you get into the office the next day, it could go from handling a breach. It could go to handling consent collection. Maybe someone wants to withdraw their consent. It goes back to you looking at the systems, analyzing where that data was stored, if you have a proper data retention policy in place. So it's basically just developing a privacy program from scratch. So it means you need to move from policy into actual implementation. Because for most organizations currently, you see maybe you have a privacy notice on your website or you have a data protection policy, but most of the time what your policy says and what you need to do are quite divergent. So my role is just to ensure that as an organization, we don't just have a policy, but we're actually actioning what that policy requires us to do.
And would you say it's the same or similar being a DPO for a local company vis-a-vis working at the group and global arena?
It's a bit different given that different data protection regulations have a bit of some divergence in what they require. For instance, if you look at something like, say, cross-border data transfer, you'd find Kenya has a more restrictive approach to cross-border data transfer of sensitive personal data. But if you look at the GDPR, for instance, there are a number of derogations that you can use as an organization. So for any DPO that is working for an organization, say that is just based in Kenya, it's I'd say a bit simpler, especially where there's no cross-border data transfer. But now if it gets into now a global perspective, you need to look at what the laws in the different countries where you operate say. And it's not just about the data protection regulations, but you also need to be aware of the other regulations. Like, for example, if you want to define your data retention limits, you can't have a blanket data retention period, say, that would cover all the countries. Each country would have different limitation periods.
Thank you for that. Dan, I know, of course, the kind of work that you do, advising both local and international companies in Kenya and across the region. Could you please touch on what it means to be external counsel for some of these companies? What are some of the roles that you play and some of the support that you offer them in your role as external counsel?
Okay, thank you, Jentrix. I'll just like to give a small comparative with what Winnie was talking about. And as an external counsel, for instance, I won't be involved in the day-to-day collection of consent or recording of this data. But then we do a lot of audits, which will then inform your organization whether you're compliant, whether you have certain things you're missing. So one of the roles I would play is, for instance, in an organization that Winnie is working for, I will go to do what we call a data mapping, establish what data they collect, why they collect it, how they store it, for how long they store it, and then that forms the basis for an audit. Through this data mapping, you're able to poke holes and establish, well, you said you collect, children's names for your employees. Why do you need them? Say, for instance, for the insurance benefits. And then that feeds into trying to ensure that the organization is compliant. Number two, we also do a lot of capacity building. And by this, I mean, the DPO internally may not be able to, educate the whole organization on the importance and the impact of data protection in their day-to-day. So as a firm, we do a lot of trainings externally to organizations. We train up to the last person, the person you think doesn't really need to know anything about data protection. That is where your breach could be coming from. Yeah, we have seen a lot of, as a trend, a lot of breaches coming from people in marketing, just because they may not even be aware that what they have done is not in compliance with the Data Protection Act. So that is what we do majorly as an external counsel.
Okay. Would you also bring in the issue of things like representation before the ODPC or the court on data protection matters? And how about breaches? If I have a breach, would I be able to rely on my external counsel to guide me through it?
Yes, and in fact, I think most people would want to assume that external counsel just comes in at the point of putting out the fire. Not entirely, but then when you have a breach, when you have a complaint that has been lodged against you, or in fact you as a data subject want to lodge a complaint against any data controller or processor, then we are able to represent you. We have done representation for a number of clients and sitting on both sides of the aisle, either as the respondents or as the complainants. And I think we have managed to get very good decisions and determinations from the ODPC.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I'll now like to turn our discussion over to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, the ODPC. Once Kenya began its data protection journey, practitioners would agree that the introduction of the ODPC really changed the game, so to speak. For those who are not aware, perhaps we can just start the discussion by talking about who is the ODPC or what is the ODPC, what are some of the roles that they play, and why is it important that we feature them in such a discussion? Winnie, maybe you can kick us off.
Thank you, Jentrix. So the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner is the Data Protection Supervisory Authority in Kenya. They're tasked with ensuring that the right to privacy under Article 31 is actually implemented and respected by organizations. So one of the key things that they do, apart from creating awareness on now the Data Protection Act, is auditing organizations to ensure they're actually compliant with the Act. Say that they'd come to an organization and look at whether you have a data protection policy in place. If you're required to have a data protection officer, have you appointed one? Does the data protection officer actually perform their function in a way that is independent? That is, there's no conflict of interest. For instance, it can't be that, say, the IT manager is your data protection officer, because, of course, they're the ones who determine the means and purpose within the organization on how you're processing data. The other thing that the office does is investigations of complaints. So, for instance, if an organization today was to send you unsolicited marketing communications and you made a complaint to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, one of the things they do is notify the organization that you've made a complaint, do the investigations. So in case as an organization you're found to be in breach, there are certain repercussions. For example, you could be required to compensate the data subject, and we've seen quite a number of compensation orders, with the range right now being between Kenya shillings 25,000 to Kenya shillings 1.9 million as compensation. But then there's also the penalty, which could be 1% of your turnover or Kenya shillings 5 million, whichever is lower. But we're also seeing a trend, especially within the industry, where most people are actually looking to see whether the Data Protection Act can actually be amended so that that reads whichever is higher, so that now organizations actually start to see why it's important to comply.
Okay, that's very interesting to note. And of course, currently there's a lot of agitation to amend the act, as you have said. Then I would like to hear from you and what your perspective is of the office, especially as a practitioner who has interfaced with it quite a bit. Yes.
So I would say, similar to what Winnie was just saying, the ODPC plays a supervisory role and an enforcement role. So they will supervise and see to it that people, organizations, data subjects, data processors, controllers, they are complying with the provisions of 1, the Constitution and Article 31, and 2, the Data Protection Act and its attendant regulations. Number 2, they will play an enforcement role. When they have done their supervision, they have done their checks, and you're not compliant, then they will play an enforcement role where, 1, they could issue enforcement notices for you to, implement the necessary data protection principles or techniques or procedures. And 2, they could also go as high as either penalizing the non-compliant entities. We have also seen an incident where they have gone for prosecution. They have recommended prosecution for now the individuals or the management behind an uncompliant entity. So that's my analysis. It's a supervisory body and an enforcement body.
Okay. And when you think of enforcement, of course, the word that would come to mind are things like punishment, penalties, and so on and so forth. What does it look like to get enforcement from the ODPC? What are some of the what's the journey? What's the journey? If I am a data subject, I have a complaint, I would like to get redress from the office. What does that look like for me?
So as a data subject, if you have a complaint, whether because as a result of a breach, or you feel like you are aggrieved by the way a data controller or processor managed the data they have, then you will lodge a complaint with the ODPC. The ODPC will do their investigation. And just to digress a bit, this is where the ODPC differs from what we see in courts. Courts will tend to take a more an adversarial position. The ODPC is more inquisitorial in that they are the ones who will reach out to the data controller. They will tell the data controller, there is this complaint that has been made against you. What do you have to say about it? And the data controller or processor will respond, and then they will come back to you as the data subject and tell you, this is the response we've gotten. Do you have any additional information that you would like to provide? Yes, no. And then they will proceed to issue a determination. If I were to compare that to a day in court, if you file a case in court, you are the one to, bring in the documentation, bring in the evidence. You will serve the opposing party, the other party. They will also put in their responses and all that, and the court will just sit at a neutral position. The very rare instances, maybe at time of hearing or examination, if something is not clear, then the judicial officer might ask for clarification. But then you see this is a very different position as to the place or the position played by the ODPC. Yeah.
Thank you. Winnie, Dan has very ably taken us through what it means to file a complaint or interact with the ODPC. For businesses, for organizations that are looking to be compliant, what are some of the areas or sectors where we have already seen the ODPC taking a strong stance in? Are they more focused on some areas than others? And what is the general trend?
Okay, so the Data Protection Commissioner's Office has taken a keen interest in the financial services sector, the healthcare sector, the education sector, and more recently, the hospitality sector. And I'd say this is for good reason, given the nature and sensitivity of the data that they process. And we've seen organizations getting a notification from the data commissioner that they should prepare for an audit, or they should actually approach the accredited auditors by the ODPC to just conduct an audit on their behalf. The other trend also has been, just last year there was the draft audit regulations that the office did publish and request for feedback from the public. So what we are seeing is at least the regulator is moving from just waiting for complaints from data subjects and actually trying to get out there and see that organizations are actually getting compliant to the Act.
When we're still, yes, Dan.
Just to interrupt you, I think as Winnie is saying, the regulator is now taking a proactive role, and if you just go to their portal and look through the determinations that they have published, you'll notice that aside from the fact that there are so many determinations on complaints, there are also determinations on suo motu investigations that the ODPC has made. So in fact, some of the things in the public domain, the ODPC will not just keep quiet and watch things as they pass by, which I think is very commendable for them in terms of ensuring that people are compliant with the Data Protection Act. They have gone a step ahead to do the investigations and, give their determinations.
It's good you bring that up because when you think of regulators, sometimes regulators do tend to have what can be called as a discernible philosophy or trend. So for the ODPC, are we seeing them being more corrective, collaborative, punitive, maybe a mixture of all? What would you say the general approach has been of the regulator?
I'll say as of now, I would categorize it as collaborative and corrective. And we're just celebrating about, is it 8 years? Also 7, give or take, 7 years of having the Act. Perhaps when we get to year 10, at that time, we will see very punitive reactions from any complaints made to the ODPC.
Winnie, do you agree?
Not really. I'd say right now the office is entering its enforcement era.
So for you, you're saying they've already arrived at the
Yes.
enforcement era.
Yes, they have, because for the longest time, it's always been about awareness, trying to bring organizations on board. They've run drives for registration. They've opened satellite offices within the counties. So now they have moved from just telling you that this is what the law requires you to do and actually coming to audit you to see if you're actually compliant. And if you're not, they're issuing enforcement notices and penalty notices. So they've moved.
Do you think Winnie is speaking from a receiving end because she's on the other side? But
You're on the other side, yeah. So for the businesses and organizations, we've seen them being the main so to speak, culprits or the main people receiving these enforcements. Would you, Winnie, take us through some of what you see as pitfalls that organizations tend to make that would make the ODPC either pursue a suo motu investigation or receive complaints from data subjects leading to investigations and enforcement? What are some of the pitfalls we're seeing?
The greatest pitfall that I'd say is on consent and consent management, where as an organization, say for instance, you want to bring in more business, but you don't really interrogate where your data comes from. For example, you don't interrogate where someone got the phone number or the email address. So you just get this data, put it in your systems, and you start sending marketing messages to individuals who never opted in to receiving those messages. And the other issue is once as an individual I have received the unsolicited messages, do you have a system in place that if I do write to you telling you that I withdraw my consent or I object to you processing my data for 1 to 3 purposes, if you do not have a system in place that you can be able to go and retrieve maybe that data, or your systems do not even speak to each other. For example, what I've seen mostly happening is you have a core system in the organization, but you also have a marketing system. So you find that the marketing system has a mechanism for opting out, but this does not communicate to your core system. So what happens when you move to another vendor? The person who had opted out in the other system will still receive the marketing messages. So when this happens, then the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner will definitely come for you.
That's interesting. And speaking of come for you, so Dan, I am a business or organization. They have come for me. I have received a notice of investigation or a complaint from a data subject. What do I do? What are some of the steps I can do or businesses can do to make sure that their interactions with the ODPC are positive and bring about a positive outcome, and that the organizations are actually also growing as well and not just receiving penalties?
Okay, let me say the obvious. Don't panic. But now, even before I respond to that, I just want to add to what Winnie was saying and just give a response on what pitfalls are there for some of these organizations. I think we treat compliance with the Data Protection Act as just a checklist, something you just need to tick. For instance, you're told that you need to get consent from the data subjects for any processing activities, and you just here's a consent form. It's signed by Winnie. I have a consent. Okay. You forget, but that after this consent, then you need to make sure Winnie enjoys her rights as a data subject. So Winnie will come and decide one day, she wants to see what data you have. And you need to show her the data that you have that belongs to her. Two, as a business, and as Winnie was saying, when you're growing, you forget some of these compliance things. So, for instance, you have grown your business, you want to engage a third party, and this third party is going to process data belonging to your data subjects. Of course, because you want to tick the box, you get into a data processing agreement or a data sharing agreement, whichever fits. And to you, you have ticked the box. You have ticked that box. But remember, you have forgotten that you didn't tell your data subject that I will be processing this data with another third party, and you're not even sure what this third party, what mechanisms this third party has in place to protect the data that you've given unto them. So it's not just ticking the box and getting all these documents and even having a proper record of them. It's not just that. You need to go as a business. You need to go an extra step. Make sure that, for instance, this third party that you're sharing data with, they have a proper data protection policy in place. They have a DPO whom you can reach out in case of anything. They are well aware of their obligations under the Act. In case of a breach, they need to notify you so that you're able to notify your data subjects. Now, to responding to your other question, when as a business you receive an enforcement notice or there's a complaint that has been made against you, or you need to, make an appearance before the ODPC, what do you do? Number one, you need to make sure you have proper documentation of everything. If it's a complaint that's coming up because someone alleges that you processed their data without their consent, then you need to go back to your system, get that consent form, and that should be one of the documents that you give to the ODPC. Number two, you need to ensure your own compliance. Are you registered as a data processor or as a data controller, as may be relevant? Do you have a data protection policy in place? Do you have a DPO? At the time of processing this data, did you inform the data subjects of the means, the purpose for processing this data, and so on and so forth, so that by the time you're getting to the DPC, then you are compliant. Now, in addressing either the complaint that has been made against you, then it becomes easier if you have all these things in place, because then you will know whether the data subject made any, made requested for any clarification from you, requested for deletion, or requested, or even withdrew their consent. You will have all these records. Yeah.
I'd like to accelerate a little and turn our discussion to courts because I usually say litigation is some lawyers' favorite topic, so we have to touch on it for their sake. And last year we had an interesting case, Arunda versus the ODPC, whereby one member of the public was challenging the ODPC's position or capability to issue penalties. What have we learned from that, and how has that impacted the practice? I'm interested to hear from you, Dan, specifically on this. And what would be your advice to other practitioners in terms of what they can learn from this case and what it means for advising their clients?
Okay. It's a very interesting case because at the time that case was in court, I also had a mixed reaction to it. And being in this space, I feel like with the outcome of that case has been really impactful because one, it has made sure that the determinations that we get from the ODPC are proper, in that they adhere to the strict procedures under the Act. And number two, it has also reaffirmed that the ODPC actually has these powers to give these decisions and to, award this compensation. So over time and historically, we know courts to be very congested. Up to just recently, that's when we've seen an expedited, resolution of court cases, which has really been enabled by one, alternative dispute resolutions. So giving ODPC these powers to hear and determine complaints and, award the necessary compensation is really good, because just looking at, if you just again go to the ODPC portal and just look at the file case number and its decision number 3048 of 2025, you can imagine if all these disputes were going to court. I'll also want to add that at times, some of the cases we take to court, we might not necessarily end up with the most appropriate judicial officer, because, for instance, if it's if you look at the nature of data protection and the practice area. It's a very niche area that you need to do quite a lot of reading. You need to have quite a lot of experience. Same as what we'll consider maybe a tax dispute. You don't just take it to any court. It need to be a specialized court. And then we have a commission here that is well capacitated, to help us in enforcing data protection. So it's the Arunda case was good in helping us ensure that we do not, we make use of the available resources as opposed to congesting our courts and, depriving other court users of a chance to prosecute their case that will be best placed in that court. However, it doesn't mean that the courts have no jurisdiction. They have proper jurisdiction because one, if the ODPC in their determination, they overstep in one way or another, then you, as the aggrieved person, you have the right to, go to court and appeal the decision. We also have judicial review if you feel like there was improper procedures there was no adherence to the proper procedures in this determination being given, then you have a right to, approach the High Court for the requisite remedies.
And just to close out this discussion, it's important to also touch a little bit on appeal. I think practitioners and even just data subjects back at home will be interested to know if I receive a determination and I would like to challenge it. What are my options here?
So the determinations that are given by the ODPC again are very comprehensive, and in as is with other courts, courts nowadays tend to give very comprehensive rulings or judgments. So in your decision to appeal, then you need to be aware: am I appealing as from a point of procedure, or am I appealing to the substance of the decision that has been given? And then number two, you also need to consider the remedy that has been given. In your opinion, is it, and not just in your opinion, I would like you to also seek legal advice, because again, being the aggrieved person, it might not be possible for you to, look at this decision and reason with it substantively. You could seek legal advice, and based off that, then you can, assess whether the remedies that were given were appropriate. Then based off that, you can decide on whether you want to appeal the decision to the High Court, or you're just going to sit on it.
I'd now like to turn into our final segment where we talk of future trends and just really give practitioners, students who are interested in this space some actionable insights and advice about what they can do. And Winnie, I'd like to start with you just because of the kind of career progression you have had. Specifically, right now we're seeing a lot of developments in the technical world. There's a lot of change happening. AI has become such a buzzword. You hear it everywhere. With the development of tech and the changes that we are foreseeing, how do you envision that this will impact the data protection space?
So I see it this way, especially as someone who's worked in-house as a DPO for the longest time. Right now, you find that the role of the DPO does not just end at understanding the law. You're now required to have technical competency. So you need to understand the IT infrastructure of your organization. And now with AI coming into play, then the role of the data protection officer has actually expanded. For instance, even in my current role, I also oversee AI governance. So you can see as a DPO, you don't only have one direction that you can go into. So for anyone who wants to get into the space, I'd say don't just stick to knowing the law, it's not enough. At the end of the day, that technical competency will take you far. So the first step would be, can you get into an organization or even a law firm such as KO, where you can get the practical experience on how to handle some of these data protection issues? Because the law could say one thing, but when you get in-house, for instance, when you get in-house, you realize that you're not there to tell the business no, because the business will ask you, then where will your salary come from? So if you tell them no, you need to also have a solution. Yes, this is what the law says. These are the boundaries you're working with. So if it is a product that needs to go to market, or it's a system that the organization wants to bring into place, then you need to know how to do things like a data protection impact assessment. So if you just know that the law requires you to do a DPI, but you don't know how to do it, when to do it, then you'll find that you're going to have a really rough time if you're to get that chance to actually be a data protection officer. The other way I'd say is, don't just stick to what you know in terms of your jurisdiction. So if you're in Kenya, for example, don't just stick to what the Data Protection Act says. You also need to look at what is best practice, what are other countries doing. For instance, just try and understand what the GDPR says in terms of how you should process personal data, because you could find that you're working for an organization that is based in Kenya, but some of its services or goods are also consumed by people who are based in the EU. So it means the GDPR could, one way or the other, also impact how you're processing that data. So you see, if you just stick to the Data Protection Act, you could be non-compliant with the GDPR, and the fines are more punitive than ours. Yeah.
For sure. Dan, what sort of advice would you give to young lawyers who are looking at you and saying, I want to do what Dan does? How do they develop that expertise and get the technical knowledge that they need to do what you do?
One, I'll tell you, there are very many short courses that have been offered nationally and globally, internationally. You could consider taking one of these short courses. Some of them are free because, again, various institutions, especially various learning institutions in Kenya, are trying to, build capacity for data protection. Just leverage on that. Take a free course. It doesn't take much of your time, but you'll learn a thing or two about data protection. Number two, as Winnie was saying, go to these specific firms, people who practice in this space. I'm sure most of them will be happy to accommodate you, hold your hand, teach you a thing or two, because in the process they might also be able to learn. Number three, read and read a lot. There's a lot of free material on data protection. There's a lot of capacity building being done by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. They, more often or not, they issue guidance notes which will help you understand data protection more. They have issued guidance notes on consent, on handling of children's data, marketing, and so on and so forth. And now this reading doesn't just go to people who are trying to get into the profession. Even you, the DPO, or you, a legal counsel for XYZ organization, go to the ODPC portal, read all this material. I was just discussing today that we have some draft guidelines that came out yesterday. We're yet to, personally, I'm yet to look at them. But again, I wouldn't let that pass, because at some point these guidelines will now be, gazetted, and they'll be in force. So do a lot of reading.
Thank you for that. That's it for our episode today. We hope that it has been insightful and helpful to you. Feel free to reach us at info@koassociates.co.ke and follow us across our social media platforms at KO Associates. Thank you, and see you next time.